It's 5:30. Good evening to all of you. Well, I'd like to start by giving you some information about the platform. Since this is not a Zoom, I can't hear you speak. So we can only speak one at a time, and I will give you the floor. There's one button if you want to choose a translation. So underneath on the right. I'd like to start by introducing myself. My name is Elena Colombo, and I'm here as part of Artribune because Director Tonelli decided that, I could be the chairman since I am responsible for a magazine about museums and digital. Nancy knows it very well because she was interviewed. Together with the Brera Academy, I follow that activity together with Brera Academy. Thank you for being here. We're going to have several speakers with different points of view, so I'm quite sure it will be quite interesting, very interesting. The title of the panel, as you know, is the challenge of digital transformation, strategies, contents, experiences, and as you know, well, since we have been working together in the past few days, we have tried to find some subjects for our questions. Obviously, we will have a few more questions for our foreign guests, Sofia Anderson and Nancy Proctor. Welcome, a special welcome to you, Sofia and Nancy. So for those of you who want to speak, please send me a message because I'd like to turn on your mic. Well, first of all, I'd like to introduce each one of you, and then I will start with the first question. So I would like to start by welcoming Sofia Anderson, Head of Digital Content at the Metropolitan Museum of New York. And she was also at the Wiki Museum, Director of Digital Media. Thank you for being here. And then we have Vanessa Proctor, Director of Peale Center in Baltimore. And she co-president of an institution. For those who know about digital museums, well, it is the Web Museum, the largest museum of this type. And then we have Anna Marras. She is carrying out a research for the University of Turin. She has a PhD in archaeology, and she coordinates the Commission on Digital Technologies for Cultural Heritage. And then we also have Alberto Bruni, responsible for strategic projects about Pompeii from MIB. And he will tell us about a very interesting project titled Smart Pompeii. I think this is all. All right, are we all here? The first question that I'd like to ask you is about sustainability and the digital world. Where's Alessandro? Sorry, I didn't introduce Alessandro Rubini. I'm sorry, because I can't see all the participants. I'm so sorry. Welcome, Alessandro. He is in charge of innovation activities at MidCom in Milan. And I'm asking the technicians if I could see Alessandro's face, that would be nice, please, or Alessandro's name at least. So let's go back to the question about the sustainability. The pandemic time, and the pandemic, they are telling me that there's no translation. Can you hear? Can you hear the translation? Is there anything you can do about it? Hello, hello, can you hear now? Can you hear now? Can you hear now? at the moment, and I heard several people saying that that digital contents, that we all need to have now. We are forced to use digital contents. Well, they could be a source of income for museums. They should be paid. People should pay for digital contents of museums. So, what do you think? What do you think from your point of view? So, starting from Nancy. I'm going to give you the floor, Nancy. Right?
I will speak in English, but I'm happy to take questions in Italian as well. Well, obviously, this is really the key question about sustainability of our cultural institutions, and obviously, the pandemic has been an enormous stress test on the future of all of our organizations, and indeed the whole sector. But this is not a new question or problem or challenge. In fact, I think we've all been talking for many years, if not decades now, that the models for financial sustainability for nonprofits and the cultural sector in general just don't work as well as we need them to. And we need new business models, we need new revenue streams, and we need new ways of working more collaboratively, frankly, not just to sustain our activities, but also to increase our relevance and our impact with the communities and the constituents that it is our mission to serve. So I think that if there is any sort of a silver lining to the pandemic, is that it's forced us to look at the ways that digital tools can further that mission to diversify revenue streams and increase sustainability of cultural organizations, but just as importantly, to find new ways of working, new ways of collaborating with audiences and constituents who may not even be local. So certainly what we've found at the Peale is that, first of all, our audiences have more than doubled since we had to take everything online. So I say this with a certain amount of sheepishness. You know, I've been working in digital for museums for over 20 years. You would have thought, especially in a museum with a born digital collection like the Peale's, that this is something that we would have been doing more with even before the pandemic. But you know, as with everyone, I think it's really focused our minds. We have streamlined our processes for running online programs. We've become more accessible. So we now have CART transcriptions and sign language interpretation as standard for all of our online programs. This has helped grow our audiences, but simply the fact that all of our programs now are accessible online has enabled people who may never be able to come to Baltimore or who wouldn't have been able to visit any given event in person to join us. And that's been really important. Now, financially, certainly we've found that we're able to charge less, or we're not able to charge the same for ticketed events online as in person. But to be perfectly honest with you, our programs were never a profitable revenue stream. They were always designed to be break even, to sustain themselves. And although I wouldn't say that it's necessarily cheaper to do things online, especially if you're adding in those accessibility components, we have been able to find ways to cover the cost, to keep the programming going while growing audiences. So in the short term, profitability of online revenue streams has not been a problem or a primary objective, but I think long term it does need to be. So that's something that, frankly, at least in our case, requires ongoing experimentation and, again, a lot of collaboration. I really think that the key to sustainability for cultural organizations lies as much in partnering with other individuals and other organizations and really letting our communities drive our programming and drive our mission as it does with any sort of magic sauce of grand business plans, that really the way we get there is through partnerships. It's through understanding that the cultural sector will all rise or fall together, and therefore it's in our best interest to work together to move everybody forward.
Mille, Nancy.
Thank you so much, Nancy. And I would like to leave the floor to Sofie, who works at Met. So she has this philosophy of approach to digital. I heard one of your interviews on a podcast where you were telling about the willingness of Metropolitan Museum to spread collections, digital collections, also through other platforms for free. So I'd like to ask you, what is your vision also in this context? I'm going to leave the floor to you. Thank you again for being with us.
And thank you to you and the organizers of this conference for inviting me. It's really wonderful to be part of this international conversation and to learn from each other, as always, but I think particularly in these moments when there are some really pertinent questions. And I think Nancy really set up a lot of the issues incredibly well. You know, I think my overarching personal philosophy and one that I've been grateful enough to work at institutions that support is that access to art and culture should be free, and that we should be able to bring it to the widest possible audience. I think it should be considered an essential part of our society, like schools and any other kind of educational endeavor. And I think that we have to be careful to provide that access without creating kind of elite superhighways of digital information. I think there's so much concern about that in our sector, about who gets access to what knowledge and information. And I think that for cultural institutions, especially ones, you know, like the Peale Center, like the Met, that are really visionaries in terms of broader cultural considerations. So I think it's really, really critical that we maintain that as a priority. I've spoken about this in the past, and this is really an initiative of the Met's that's been in place for a few years, but the open access to the Met's collection is really fundamental to that mission of bringing education and access to knowledge outside of the boundaries of the museum, and not just to do it in sort of a, you know, here you go, it's there, come and get it, but to really actively go out and find partners and platforms that we can bring that content to. So whether it's partnering with Wikipedia, or whether that's partnering with a gaming platform like Animal Crossing, you know, it's really a way to bring the conversation about the vitality of art and the interconnectedness of art with other societal considerations. So art not just as an island, or museums as an island of kind of, again, elite education, but as being part of how people find meaning in their world. I think, as Nancy mentioned, this question of how do we pay for it has been something the sector has been thinking about for a long time, and I think it's really, you know, very different in the US than it is in the European models. We don't have as much government support. We really rely a lot on our audiences to bring that revenue in, and that, you know, that audience has more or less disappeared over the last, you know, 8 to 9 months. So that question, as Nancy said, has really been brought to the front in terms of how do we really support this work. One thing I'll say that's a positive development is that where I think this was sometimes a bit of an academic conversation in museums, it's now more obvious than ever how important it is to have digital communication and dialogue with your audiences. It's not enough for us just to put content out on the website. We have to be there with our audiences. We have to be relevant. We have to be part of the conversation. And I think while it's necessary for us to think about how to create revenue in any digital ecosystem is really challenging. And, you know, we have subscription models, you know, within museums, that's the membership model. And I think that can go a long way. And I do think kind of thinking about, you know, first access and, you know, some behind the scenes content that gets to people first is a way to kind of leverage the experience. But I think more than anything, creating content that people actually want to support. That's, I think, the really critical thing. I think that it's not enough to say we think it's interesting in the museum world. It has to be compelling and relevant to our audiences. And you have to start there. And then you can talk about getting support for it through the various channels. Another thing that I think is really critical is, in addition to dialogue with our audiences, is actually being innovative in our partnerships. So thinking outside the museum sector for how we can create partnerships. We've done some of this at the Met. We worked really closely with Microsoft on their Flipgrid platform, which is a way to reach kids around the world and get content, not just kids content, but just general open access content out there for them to use as part of their lessons. And then also with companies that maybe can also support financially. So whether that's places like Nickelodeon or National Geographic, again, thinking about content partnerships that are not about kind of one sector to our audiences, but really thinking about that in a bigger way. And I would just end by supporting Nancy's point about kind of collaborating across the sector on these kinds of things. I think that the museum sector is really generous with one another, but I think thinking about pushing how to innovate within this space, I think would be really, really important, because the sustainability of this work is very fragile. And it's, like, I think that stress test analogy is really right now. It's really showing the cracks, and we have to pave a way for us to be continuing to reach our audiences in this way, because I think even after the pandemic, people will really expect this much more than they did before.
What do you think about digital technologies for cultural heritage? Thank you, Mariana. Thank you. Well, yes, we're carrying out several activities between ICOM and Microsoft, especially with regard to distance learning for students at the moment by using Microsoft tools. At ICOM Italy, especially in the last year, we have been working a lot on sustainability, as Sofie said, the accessibility to data and accessibility to information, and also open data. This year, we had the Cultural Digital Heritage Group, coordinated by Sara Orlandi. That group is dedicated to copyrights and OP data. And ICOM itself, through its president, has gone to the Parliament and talked at the Parliament, supporting the importance of open data in the cultural field. So in my opinion, the main point of digital sustainability, in my opinion, and also according to ICOM's opinion, considering the latest activities we have carried out, in our opinion, it is very important to have open data again. Because as we saw from the Reisky Museum, for example, that the business model of the Reisky Museum on open data is showing that is proving to be very good. Well, the museum is not having economic difficulties because they have open data for its collections, and well, actually, on the contrary, the turnover is increasing. So the topic of sustainability, obviously, we start from open data, but it's not just about that. It's about many more aspects, many more things that are also related to the design of technologies and digital contents. It is vital that technologies and contents are open, that they can be reused, and also the transition, the passage from one technology to another must be supported. And obviously, this is the base of digital technologies and digital design of museums. And then the other topic is digital sustainability, but also environmental disability. Environmental aspects. So how to dispose of technologies. We should buy sustainable hardware technologies or hardware that could be recycled differently from the hardware that we're using at the moment. I'm an archaeologist, by the way, just like Mariella, so that's why I think about it, but quite often we find ourselves inside museums with archaeological items. Monitors or screens that are not working anymore, or screens, technological devices that are too old. So sort of archaeology. And that's why we should ask ourselves and understand that technologies have a cycle of life. They are not forever. So when we design them or when we buy them, we should be aware that sometimes we need to renew them, or we should also renew the interface of the website, because otherwise we will be outdated. We would be a bit archaeological, let's say. So I think that also this aspect, sorry, I'm not really replying to your question, Mariella, but I just wanted to highlight these points because I think that they're quite important too. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Anna. It was, very important to underline also these aspects, of course, because you talked about design, you talked about open source, open data, and also you highlighted that devices get old, just like software programs get old. And this is all part of the sustainability of the digital sector. So digital sustainability for museums, collaborations, etc. So now I'm going to leave the floor to Alberto. The key word is going to be archaeology. So I'd like to ask you, when we talk about Pompeii, very famous archaeological site, what about the sustainability of the tools that are used in order to enjoy Pompeii, also from a distance, also online? Well, thank you. Well, I'd like to go backwards. I'd like to make a step backwards. As many of you know, thanks to the fact that we are a UNESCO site, and also thanks to the funds from the European Union, in the last few years, we have managed to start and to implement many initiatives also from the technological development point of view, so also digitalization. These resources were very important. They were very important for, obviously, the restoration and also consolidation of some areas in Pompeii archaeological site. And also we tried to start, solving some problems related to hydrogeological hydrogeological risk, thanks also to the collaboration with Italian and international industrial partners. For satellite monitoring, for example, we have built a model of satellite monitoring that allows us to activate some new planned maintenance procedures. But however, the very important aspect related to digitalization and digital contents, well, our archaeological area can produce some digital contents, of course, available to the users. This is quite a complex topic, but it's also a challenge for us because we have, ancient buildings, ancient archaeological buildings. We have above all, we have photographic archives from the 19th century. And, they are photos and photos that were taken during excavations, together with some paper documents, which we have turned into digital documents. We have restored them, and they will be available in digital format for our internet users, for the public. At the same time, we have also laser scanned the entire archaeological site. So we're now able to build 3D models in a high resolution. And also, we have carried out a photo campaign also in high resolution. So we have lots of information, huge amount of information, which we're working on in order to make it accessible to everybody. Well, because, I've been dealing with information systems for more than 40 years. When we had floppy disks at that time, it was a different world. We want to be open from all the point of view of being open and make this very important heritage available to everybody. And we want our digital contents to be open to everybody. Then there are also some other initiatives related to digital production. A very important aspect and I think this is one of the most beautiful projects, is that we have made a journey for people with motor disabilities that goes through the entire city, more than 3 kilometers for disabled visitors who can safely visit our archaeological park. So together with technologies and also, as usual, with the support of very important partners, we have also developed an electronic bracelet for visitors so that visitors' visit is safer. They're always in contact with our operating room. If they need us, we are there for them. And the bracelet also provides contents. This is an experimental project. We are still optimizing it. We have made a version of it during COVID. Well, actually, when we reopened in last May, we reopened the park. And we will give the bracelet to people with disabilities so that they can have access to more adequate areas that are more accessible for them. One of the problems that I see is, of course, the financial sustainability for the production of digital contents. During the very strict lockdown we had, we started producing our own contents, videos, but not only videos. So mainly we uploaded them on the net through the social channels. If we want to produce high quality products which are more professional, obviously we need to have financial resources. This is a model that we are starting to test right now. We have just opened a crowdfunding channel and webpage. Hopefully we will manage to receive money from the users in order to be able to produce more digital contents. But, we are very keen on working on the quality of the contents and in particular, making the areas of the archaeological park more accessible and more available. Yes, well, thank you. Of course, when we talk about archaeology, for sure, digital tools can help a lot because there's an entire world to be reconstructed. So I'd like to leave the floor to Alessandro. I apologize again. So Alessandro, I'm leaving the floor to you about sustainability, still the same topic. But about this new idea of Milan, that is to say, well, meet the experience of meet. You, Alessandro, you have enough experience at meet. So can you tell me about what you think about contents of digital contents of museums to be paid by the public? And also, I know that you were going to inaugurate your center, but then, well, due to COVID, what can you tell us what happened? Thank you, Mariella. Good evening to all of you. Yes, we opened the first center of digital culture in Italy exactly on the 28th of October. So we opened. And we had very few visits of small groups of people. None of you was there, so I'd like to invite you to come and see us as soon as it is possible because it's really worth seeing it. Just a couple of words about why it is important to have a center of digital culture. And Maria Grazia Mattei, the founder of MIT, felt the need to open up a physical place, a tangible place. It may sound weird. We're talking about a digital culture. Why not staying on a digital level? Well, the place is a very important place, first of all, because it was important to give a house to digital culture for various reasons. Well, first of all, the topic of digital transformation is a cultural topic. So it has a deep capacity of transformation on a society, which is not always perceived. When we talk about digital updating or digital education, well, maybe people don't understand how important digital transformation is. So the digital topic has to be faced from the cultural point of view. And this is why we needed to have a house, a place, a building representing it. And then another big challenge is to make the digital, so the intangible, tangible inside a place. This is fundamental because the place, the space, is the most powerful medium. And so, is there anything better than a house, than a physical space to welcome people and to make them perceive the experience of the digital? Well, I think that this is very important because at the moment the digital world is becoming mainstream and simplified a bit too much. Digital tools allow to have online connections, obviously, but not only that. Well, it allows to increase the contents. So the risk is that the digital world is seen only as a possibility to transfer contents, tangible contents, physical contents into a virtual environment so that faraway people can have access to them. Well, of course, that's one possibility which we are appreciating, but the digital world is much more than that. It's a bigger change which allows us to do many more things. So it's very important to be together, still be together. The digital world allows us to be together, but also at a distance. Obviously, using the same contents as a convergence point. So the element of cohesion is very important. Obviously, building a place of culture means that, well, we may fall into the trap of a business model. Building a place of culture means playing a social role, universal role. So it means, guaranteeing accessibility because you want to spread your message, and therefore you can't use the classical market strategies. So price based on the value that you provide. So for a digital culture center, the problems are just the same as the ones of a normal culture place. And the possibility to become sustainable is linked to what my colleagues said. So we need to collaborate with other individuals, other subjects in order to create value into different directions. A digital culture center can work on its collections, but also on concepts, on value, on contents. And so the competence given by the digital culture can be used in order to promote many contents, many values, and many projects. So I think that the Digital Culture Center has to act as a broadcaster, as a publisher. It is a meeting place. It is a meeting place where contents are curated within the digital framework. But digital and physical world have to coexist and integrate each other. Well, I think besides, there's another myth, not our myth, obviously, we all know it's not true, but people think that digital means cutting on costs. Well, the introduction of technologies inside processes is due to the fact, to the objective to try and generate more efficiency, more efficacy, and reduce costs. I'm an economist. I understand these logics quite well. It is true that the digital can make some processes much more efficient. This is true for sure. But a digital culture center doesn't have to worry too much about these aspects. The market, large industries know about it. They will try and digitalize their activities in order to cut on costs. But a digital culture center, has to work on different aspects, on building a new critical awareness, and also on the citizens understanding the huge creative potential of the digital world. This means, that we have to keep on doing a traditional job of learning new knowledge, getting to know new people, and it takes some time. So it's not very efficient on one hand. Then on the other hand, for many of us, dealing with culture, this means making new investments. because, having collections or an important historical artistic heritage is not enough anymore. Today, you need to find the most adequate way to curate your contents, creating a hybrid with the new digital contents. For sure, we can't just transfer the contents into digital contents as they were. We need to use a new language, the language of the new medium, for sure. So if I make an audiovisual product on Raffaello, on his 500 years anniversary, it's not sufficient to have one painting by Raffaello at home, but I will also have to make something of an extremely high quality in order to promote the value of Raffaello. But this means making investments in those places of culture that were not born as broadcasters, but now they need to acquire new skills, new competence. If they don't, they will have to build collaborations with some other parties who do have the competence. So what I can expect for the future, and I wish there will be more collaboration between broadcasters and places of culture, so that culture is promoted in the right way within the digital environment. How to make it sustainable? I don't know. Frankly, I don't have the answer. Probably no one has. But I'm sure that the cultural mission is taking us in that direction. I hope that the policymakers, so public and private policymakers who've always supported this cultural mission, I hope they understand that this is the right way to go. I think that the citizens can support some of these activities, but obviously they cannot do anything to make them economically sustainable. I hope that within this collaboration between places of culture and editors and publishers, there will be competence, new competence for at the service of the world of education, of businesses, etc. Thank you. Well, you touched upon many points. Some things that I really love. I wrote down some keywords that you all mentioned, really, and well, something that came to my mind was organic growth. So for a museum, growing in terms of reputation. Growing in terms of reputation means being able to create relations, as you said, as Alessandro said. Another another very important topic is the education of new generations that are familiar with the tools, but not with the contents. And also, going back to the ancient meaning of museums, that is to say, feeding the creative industry. This could happen at a place like MIT or online. And so I'd like to mention one of the most meaningful examples, Rex Museum, for example. So they are providing high-resolution materials from the museum. And in that way, they are inviting designers from all over the world to create pieces of design for the collection. So the main idea we're going towards to is co-creation, not only crowdfunding, but co-creation, co-hybridization. So now I'd like to welcome Christopher, who's just joined us. I'd like to introduce him to you. Christopher shares with Nancy and Sofie an experience at Antenna International, if I'm not wrong. He's He's been an expert, a professional for 15 years, deals with interpretation on mobile content, of contents on mobile. He worked for more than 1,000 web pages in Europe and in the world. Welcome, Christopher. I hope you can hear me. Would you like to try and reply to the question that is to say, how can we join sustainability with digital contents? Well, when there's no ticket to be paid. Christopher, I'm trying to give the floor to you.
Not sure if you can hear me. Okay, great. Thank you. Well, first of all, sorry I'm late dialing in. Could you repeat the question that you actually want to ask, please? Sorry.
If you can try and keep your microphone quite close to your mouth as you were doing now. So the question is, during the pandemic, considering that the contents of institutional, cultural institutions and museums the content is now online, so it has been transferred online. I asked your colleagues what they think, if they think that they should be paid for. So digital contents, do you think they should be paid by the public so that digital production is more sustainable? What do you think? I hope you could understand the question now. L'iniziativa
In times of lockdown, being able to provide some form of digital experience that's as free as possible, that seems to work. And prior to the second wave lockdowns coming in place here in Europe 2 weeks ago at the beginning of November, we were getting, we got up to 17,000 page views a week from those 80 sites. I think what's interesting though is the discussion about, is there a space for paid for digital as well as free digital? I mean, clearly there is a mission and a sense in the mission to provide as many assets and as many resources that are free to use as possible. And you can see how they've been used. And when we look at the sites that we've worked with, where there's been a particular success in people accessing and engaging with those contents, you know, you can see how valuable that kind of resource is, not just with people who are locked down on their own, but as an educational resource, as a means by which you can keep in touch with people who are friends or patrons or enjoy visiting your site. But in addition to that, I think that the way in which the discussion is working with the clients that we have, for a lot of them, it's the first time that they've really engaged with that kind of online activity. and particularly a lot of the smaller clients in Europe, here in Germany, that are really beginning to see what's possible. And I think that sort of then ties in with what we're seeing with a lot of our bigger clients, which is there actually an opportunity to provide paid for digital experiences as well? And I think this is something that's quite different to the concept of providing a public service. I think that is something that everybody's very committed to and everybody should be committed to. But if this whole point about creating virtual experiences and creating digital experiences is something that people are engaging with in a large scale, is there also an appetite for people to actually be spending money and engaging in specific opportunities that are created for that reason? And that's something that we're very interested in looking in at the moment. I don't have any answers to that, but I certainly think that seems to be the direction that a lot of our clients are taking at the moment. Prego.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Well, I keep on thinking about Aaron Schwartz's words, and so I'd like to invite all of you to think about it. And well, I think we should look at those who have already made some decisions. For example, newspapers. And I will try to ask you a second round of questions. We are going a bit slow, but anyhow, I will try to make ask a second question to you, and we will see if we have time about measurements. So, well, you know, due to the pandemic, we have to re-understand, re-measure what has a value and in which way. You know, earlier we mentioned the experience of Katie Price that said that there was a good proportion between physical visitors at Alberto Museum and, well, 1/4 of visitors were physical visitors, while the remaining was online. So now we have changed it all. What is going to happen since our museums are closed? And also, how is it going to influence on our evaluation of the offline and online in the future? I don't know if my question is clear, really. I'm going to give the floor to Nancy.
A little bit to position myself here as an expert when you are asking the question, Maria Elena. But sure, you know, again, the stress test of the pandemic, I think, has shown that the question and the need for quality data analysis is greater than ever. I am reminded often of a wonderful essay that Rob Stein published, gosh, I guess it was back in 2014 or 2015, about the real opportunity for museums to demonstrate their value and their impact by getting very good at measuring their digital connections and the collaborations and the outcomes of those. And sadly, I think we've done better, but we're far from realizing the full potential there. And even, you know, for the Peale, where our collection is really, except for our historic building, completely born digital, even the tools that we need to adequately measure our data, our communications, our audiences, how they consume our content, are not within our reach, either because they're too expensive for an organization like ours, or because of, and this is the larger problem really, the barriers that are built into the platforms themselves. So just as an example, we are sharing stories about Baltimore that are produced by people who live there, love Baltimore. They might be historians, they might be citizens, they might be artists, they might be students, teachers. They could come from any walk of life. And perhaps that story is an audio, primarily audio story. So we're syndicating it through everything from our SoundCloud channel to Facebook, sharing it on Twitter. It's part of our app, it's part of our website. And of course, the producers and their networks are similarly sharing these stories out. This is an important part of the kind of distribution strategy and the network effects that we're aiming to create. But the way that, say, SoundCloud counts a listen or an audience member is different from how YouTube does or Facebook does or even our app backend does. So even if we can harvest actual numbers in terms of listens and audience reach from each of these platforms, actually aggregating them and adding them together is a little bit like trying to add apples to oranges. So I think that we're facing really a trifecta of challenges here. One, the museum sector, and not only the museum sector, but we're not very good at counting, at data analysis and collection, and getting good about asking the right questions of our data to start with. We don't necessarily have or can afford the tools that will help with that. And there's just then this kind of the overwhelmingness of there is so much to measure. And where does one start? So I guess that goes back to this first question of we really need to learn how to ask the best questions of the data before we're going to get the things that we really need out of it. So to be perfectly honest with you, I would like to turn the question back to Maria Elena and hear her talk a little bit more, but also the other colleagues on the panel.
Grazie, Nancy.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you. You're right, it's true. Actually, also during our last meeting, we talked about it. I'm still thinking about it. And well, as I said earlier, having the ability to show everybody that we have reached the objectives is important, but we also need to show which objectives, and also we need to be able to create some reports that show our achievements. These are some of the challenges of museums at the moment. So you mentioned the essay by Robert Stein, if I'm not wrong, and you said that he refers to the fact that if museums are not able to communicate in a powerful way, we will not manage to collect resources in order to go on. And I think that was the main message of that article. Now I'm going to leave the floor to Sofie. Certainly, his comment is going to be much better than mine for sure.
I think the question around, what do we look for in our data and why is data important? I think, it's, as Nancy sort of laid out and Maria Elena, you were mentioning, data is really key to be watching at all times, but especially now. I think for us at the Met, we have been looking at ways that we can share our data across the museum. Internally in the museum for some time, we have a dashboard. It's very transparent what the numbers are across our own channels and then also our partner channels. And it's a really, really key means of communication within the museum in terms of what's actually happening. And we use it frequently to inform our decision making. So looking at the trends, looking at what's happening, and being able to really adjust our digital strategy and our programming strategy to what we're seeing and our digital development strategy. So, you know, I think in terms of the current moment, we obviously, like many others, most others in the sector, I think saw a huge surge of interest in our channels and our partner channels in the early days of the pandemic. And, you know, we are used to reaching about 30 million visitors with our website typically. And we've looked at our our partner channels throughout this period, and we're now reaching about 250 million people worldwide. It's a lot of people and a lot of data. So I think you know, even with some resources on our side, that's just a lot to be looking at any one time. So we, you know, really do look at what are some of the key kind of aspects of that data? What's our reach? What's our engagement like? And what's our impact? And obviously, I should say sort of as soon as possible that numbers alone don't tell the story of what you're trying to say in terms of your criteria for success. We talked about this a little bit earlier, and I think it's really important to say that when you're looking at the numbers, it's not apple to apples, as Nancy was saying, across different platforms, which makes this hard. But you can talk about what engagement means on the different channels, and you're able to talk about how you're impacting your audiences. So that can be about, you know, how long somebody listens or watches, what they go on to do after they've engaged with that particular experience, and how they engage with you in terms of any dialogue, if it's on a social media channel or YouTube or Pinterest or whatnot. And I think those different metrics are really, really an important kind of universe or ecosystem to be looking at. And I think quite often people want to say, you know, how did this one video perform, or how did this one page perform? But you really need to look at it as an ecosystem. What did this do for your audience? Did they engage? Did they take you somewhere? Obviously, Maria Elena, you were also asking about conversions from on-site to online. The Met is about 3 to 3, so it's about 3 times online normal times to what we have on site. In this pandemic period, it's been everywhere from 58 times our numbers online to on-site, of course, because we were closed for such a long time, but also even when we've reopened. The other thing I'd say is that we're looking really carefully at what is successful during this period. And I say carefully because there are certain areas of our ecosystem that have been doing really well. So our 360 videos and our kids content, not surprisingly, have done really well as people are looking for kind of virtual experiences from afar. Our timeline of art history, which actually wasn't doing as well before the pandemic, that product's been doing even better. And that's a good example of one that we were looking at for a long time before, and we've started a conversion over platforms with that product. It's a legacy product that hadn't really been reinvested in, and that I felt was really important that we needed to kind of commit more resources to. And in overhauling that, we were kind of perfectly poised for this moment to have a better platform ready for distance learning and for people to engage. But I think we have to be really careful to understand what are long-term successes coming out of this period. You know, what might do well in kind of the throes of pandemic fever, and what is going to do well later on. So virtual events is one of those areas we're looking at really carefully. I think, like a lot of museums, we had a huge amount of energy around that, and we still do create a lot of virtual events with varying degrees of quality. And I think early on, our audiences were just hungry for connection. We all just wanted to continue to hear from each other, and I think that carried over into the museum space. But now we've really seen traffic drop off, and we have to be much more discerning again about what content goes out there. And for us at the museum, we've kind of created an ecosystem now where we have a lot more producers of content around the museum, which has been great to empower people. But we have to be really careful that we're still looking at this again in terms of a digital ecosystem, and the standards within that ecosystem are pretty high. You know, people will tell you whether or not they're interested in what you're doing. I'll leave it at that so we can hear from others.
Dashboard, the dashboard. Elena Villaspesa worked on it, if I'm not wrong, at the Metropolitan. And in terms of transparency, well, it is a very far-sighted operation. So now I'd like to finish with this round of questions. And I'd like to invite you to think, well, if the metrics, with regard to the metrics, what do you think are the metrics in the future? I mean, do you think there will be cultural changes in the future, in the long term? I'm going to leave the floor to we don't have the metrics, so we don't have the right metrics that we should use right now. We haven't found a way to compare the data related to physical visitors, offline visitors, and virtual visitors. So there's no comparison. A few articles have been written, but real experiences have not been made. Well, some large museums, of course, like Met, which have a huge quantity of data, and so they can monitor much better, and they can also create some predictive systems. But some other museums can't afford it because they don't have so much data. They don't collect all that information differently from Met, for example, also online. So in my opinion, well, we should think about metrics that are scalable, adjustable to the different realities and contexts, the right ones. And well, something fundamental again is transparency. We know that Met is characterized by transparency, which doesn't only mean publishing reports, which is quite important. I'd like to remind you that most of Italian museums don't do that, but also publishing data in an open data format so that they can be reused. Because, you know, maybe the museum will not have a good idea about how to compare the data, but somebody else might do it, might carry out some studies with that data. So, well, just giving an Excel spreadsheet or some data in open format would be fundamental in order to improve this situation, in order to find together a solution that helps us well join the data. And well, as you said, and as we said, at the moment, it's quite difficult to give an answer on how to read the data. Well, certainly collecting it is important, but often it's also true that after collecting it, we also have to know what to do with it. Because it's true, well, we draw up a report, we are aware of the results, but then the data is not used in order to improve ourselves or to change some aspects. So from this point of view, I think, well, we should be supported by user designers, a user experience that may help us understand the data, read the data. So I'm not just referring about a different metrics system, collection of data, but also monitoring of social media, sentiment analysis, and all the other applications. And now it's so trendy to talk about artificial intelligence. But artificial intelligence allows us to collect data and compare data for sure. But obviously, and I'm going back to my previous observation, the data needs to be in large quantities because these systems work very well only if they have large quantities of data, instructing the various machines that support us and also support each other. So this is fundamental in my opinion. And then the other fundamental thing is comparing the data over time. So why is it so necessary to have published reports, open data reports? Well, because in that way we would be able to monitor the evolution, and we would also be able to define the future metrics in order to help the museum find out more about real or virtual visitors. The elements you are satisfied with or successful elements. Well, with regard to data analysis, also through some other technologies that are capable of getting information, intercepting information. But well, you see, we're talking about data related to off-site visitors, so physical visitors. Instead, with regard to digital visitors, we started only a short time ago. We only analyze the visitors to our webpage and the social channels because we started a very short time ago. Instead, with regard to data related to physical visitors in the archaeological area, yes, we started a few years ago. We have some sensors in the archaeological area of Pompeii, which is badly affected by the number of people visiting it, almost 4 million people visiting it. So it's a big problem. Therefore, as I said, we collect data through our sensors positioned in the archaeological area. This is important. We collect lots of data. What we're doing at the moment, as well as well, creating this platform or implementing this platform. Actually, I have a video for you today if we have time. So through the new technologies like artificial intelligence, big data analytics, and also the use of the blockchain with regard to exchange of information, we have an app in order to well, manage opening times after the lockdown. We have a system, a communication system between visitors, users, and us. And we are now building a digital ecosystem that will involve the stakeholders of the archaeological park, so the UNESCO buffer zone, with the aim to further develop our digital platforms. We would like to use the data also for economic operators. So what we're doing basically is we're starting from a safety and security need and also management of anthropic impact in order to create or collect big data of information. Since it will be data of different nature, obviously that data will need to be analyzed. And the data will need to be available to academics, researchers, and so again, open data is strategic. This is what we are doing at the moment. In the last few months, we've been doing it. Well, I can show you the video if you want, if we have time. I'd like to show you some assets. Well, I'd like to show you the funds that we managed to get for our archaeological area, which information we managed to collect through our systems. All right, so now we're going to watch the video, and then we will finish our
Ok, rieccoci. Grazie mille. Certo, siamo in presenza di uno dei beni più complessi.
This is one of the most complex sites to manage and to maintain. I know it takes a certain level of commitment. I'd like to ask Alessandro, in terms of metrics, have you asked yourselves, how to measure the success of the operation? And also, well, I'd like to say that I couldn't come to your inauguration because I was in quarantine with my child. Well, thank you. Actually, well, for sure, I'm waiting for you. We are closed now, but as soon as we open, again, I'd like to invite all of you. With regard to metrics and how to bring a community inside a new cultural project, well, Obviously, we have made some remarks, some observations. We've thought about it. So shifting from something very classical, that is to say, well, shifting from lectures and talks that were being held inside of the city. And instead, now we have a much wider operation. Well, we had to communicate to the community about those contents. We told them that Meet will try to convey contents and messages, and not only throughout talks, but also content production activities, meetings, etc. So the objective is to make sure that the community will keep on following us and will listening to us. But clearly, it's also very important to build a new audience, to build new relations. I think that more and more, one of the key competencies is the community making. So a place of culture has to build relations which produce value. And this is a fundamental element, especially in the digital society, the topic of participation. It requires an exchange between those who manage a place of culture and those who are going to visit it. With regard to metrics, honestly, I must say no, we don't have a reference metrics for this. Well, clearly, data can be interpreted in different ways. I'm always very cautious when I talk about data. Well, you know, the risk is that, well, data is collected just like some time ago. Everybody wanted to open a website, a social channel where, well, they felt they wanted to do it, but without knowing why. So, as Anna Maria said, I'm collecting data, but I also need to understand exactly which data and also which questions I should ask myself when I collect the data. Does it have a meaning? How do I want to use this data? So collecting data about the public is fundamental because it's vital to know your own audience. It's important. Clearly, many other companies in other sectors are much more advanced than the world of culture when it comes to collecting data and knowing how to use it. So the question is, do we want to collect the data for doing some micro-targeting operations in order to get with the right content to the right people? Do we want to meet those people during their day when they need it? Well, this might be an objective, but the strategies, the tools have already been coded. Another thing that seems much more interesting and more relevant is being able to offer all the possible data, all the data that talk about your content. So that's important. Therefore, digitalizing your collection, making the contents, digital contents, interconnected with other sources of knowledge, other platforms, existing platforms. This seems to be a good way to use our own data. So allowing people who are not looking for us to intercept our data, which is useful for their search and their knowledge process. So by doing that, really, we meet people wherever they are, and they get to know us even if they are not looking for us. Why that? Well, because we have allowed our data to be connected with the digital environment, to be connected with the external world, and be easily accessible in the world, be easily accessible to the people. This is interesting. Because, well, you know, sometimes people may get to us even if they're not looking for us, but simply because we have shared the data, because we have made the data easily accessible, we have connected the data with the other places, attended by people, and that's where the people found the data. And then they will come and see us. So when we talk about how much audience is digital, how much is real, for sure, most of our audience will be digital in the future. Maybe they will never come to see us in person, but they will find our data, our contents, and they will use them for creative processes. It will be just an input, not the output. And this is a fundamental thing. I think this social mindset related or connected to sharing. So this is a cultural effort we have to make. I think this is the right approach, which demonstrates that how the places of culture have to treat data. Obviously, there are different levels, different dimensions. It's right, it's correct to use data for preservation. Monitoring of data can help us constantly monitor the level of maintenance of our collections, of our parks, and so we will know better how to intervene. So it's very important to collect data for managerial reasons. But, well, it's good also to think about data and how to share the data with the external world, and also obviously for well-targeted marketing operations. It's important to keep all these aspects under control. Well, thank you. I know that we have been speaking quite in general. So we have talked about, traceability, maintenance, sharing of data. We have touched upon so many different topics. It's all to be taken into consideration. And for sure, we also need some vertical capabilities before putting all of them together. So now I'd like to ask Chris. Chris, would you like to tell us a little bit about how you measure an experience, a successful experience, since it's free of charge? So Sofie was talking about the online experience for children. They saw that the numbers are growing. So I'd like to ask you, Chris, because, well, I think personally that right now they have managed to intercept a need with a product that was already existing. They have created some space. There was a space for that product. So, Chris, do you think the same about your work? You're filling a gap now with your work?
Success. Obviously, different sites and different places have their own ideas of success. Nancy made a very important point, which is, no one source has the same kind of way in which you can download metrics as anyone else. So actually judging that success becomes quite challenging. What we saw with, and what we continue to see with our clients, is that a huge amount depends on the kind of channels that they use. And for some sites, obviously, that's a global presence and a series of global channels. But for many other sites, and particularly smaller sites, it could be a local network. It could be the degree to which they can put something and promote something in the local press and have a local community engage with their building, their site during lockdown. And if they can point to people engaging in a digital experience in the local community, then for that site, that's successful. Something that Sofie mentioned that we've also seen very much as well is that because of necessity, a lot of people are generating their own content on site. So you see things like volunteer room wardens in historic sites creating their own content, sometimes just recording it on their own phones and putting those into digital experiences. And I know that those sites find it very interesting when they see the data and see that somebody, in Mexico has downloaded and looked at 50 minutes of an engagement of an audio tour created for a castle in Dublin. Does that really do anything for the mission? Does that do anything for the site? And I think, you know, that goes back to some of the things that we've been saying on this call, which is during the first wave of the pandemic and the first wave of lockdown, there was a need to just get stuff out there and just to show that there is some form of engagement happening. It doesn't matter if it's the person down the road or the person on the other side of the world. And again, you know, to what extent does that impact and does that influence how we use data to move a site forward, to move a curatorial mission forward or an educational mission forward? And I think that now that we've had 6 months of living in this pandemic, and we can see how different kinds of sites are engaging with digital experiences in a virtual environment, in an online environment, what we're now seeing is how some things are really being honed. So everybody's talked about education. For those of you that know about what the Imperial War Museum does with the Holocaust galleries, watching how they've been able to take an online experience that was essentially a progressive web app and actually turn that into an online classroom experience. That's very interesting. And looking at the number of museums who are doing that kind of thing. So they're taking data and seeing that they have an upsurge in people engaging in educational content, looking at what that educational content is, and then creating classroom-based activities around that. I think that's one thing that's very interesting. Also interesting looking at between the first wave and the second wave of the pandemic, when we had a release on the lockdowns and we had sites remobilizing, looking at how a lot of those sites, whether those are very big art museums, small historic sites, whatever, looking at what actually worked in that digital engagement and then trying to replicate that in the actual physical site when it reopened. And what's been very interesting is seeing two things. The first is sites like Wartburg, which is a castle here in Germany, has seen a 75% uptake of people using their own phones to download content on site. And looking at the demographic of those people, it's predominantly seniors, and it's people who are very senior, people in their 70s who are using and engaging with digital experiences in ways that they'd never seen before and we hadn't really seen before. And then I think also looking at the way in which a lot of the things that people developed in terms of how they're creating content in the pandemic and being moved forward into how people are actually using things on site and creating experiences on site as well. And again, Sofie, you alluded to that in what you've seen at the Met, that you now have a much bigger range of people who are much more confident in creating content. And I think there's a much bigger acceptance of a wider community of engaging in content. And then I think that where that leads to is as we look to next year, when hopefully we'll be in a post-COVID environment, is the whole point about collecting data, because I think we all realize how important that is, and we've always realized how important that is